So we're talking with Al Rojas here, and Al, you were one of the early organizers of the United Farm Workers. Is that right?
Well, let me correct you because a lot of people are totally unaware about the history, and that's been done purposely to kind of like bury the true history. The fact is that we, on the coastal valleys of California, which would be from Ventura County all the way up to Salinas and Watsonville regions, we were organizing through a union, which was founded on the basis of the name the United Farm Workers Independent Union. But at the same time, uh, in Delano, California, Chavez and the Filipino Union, the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, FLCIO, with Larry Young, Ben Gines, Phil Veracruz, and etc. And also Chavez, which didn't have a union. What he did have was an NGO, which was the National Farm Workers Association. It was not a union at the time of the strike. And a lot of people were totally unaware to this day. At the same time, we had already, joined with Chavez in support with food and canned food and many of the things that kept the union going and donations, monetary donations.
And what years are we talking about
We're
here?
talking about 1965, 66,
Okay.
and so the union was based out of San Jose, the United Farm Workers Union, and of course, the ensuing strife in Delano got a lot of notoriety, not only in this country but all over the world in regards to grape pickers. We're finally moving on to building a union of their choice from the bottom up. So
This is the union that you were involved in organizing, talking about,
no,
or the Chavez.
no, Chavez and the Filipino Union, and it was really the Filipino Union that started the strike in Coachella, which is southern part of California.
Okay.
So the harvest moves up in the summertime from the Coachella Valley, Palm Springs area, basically, moves then northward into the Bakersfield, San Joaquin Valley. And the harvest starts there right around, I would say, June, July. You start seeing grape picking in that region. But we basically were based out of the coastal valleys, where you had the vegetable row crop, and you had the lemons and avocados, and you had the strawberries. Strawberries was primarily the largest, let's say, product, money-making product for growers in the regions of the coastal valleys because so close was the harvest to in the fields to the ocean that you got the kind of heat, and then you got the coolness in the evening, and at night you get kind of like the fog that comes in. So it's very keen with the harvest there, and that region of the coastal valleys would go all the way up to as far as up north as so we would say Sonoma in that area, the regions, because they had chicken farms there, and in San Jose they had tree fruit, and they had canning tomato industry. So we were separate, but we were helping and supporting with what was considered then some boycotting that were doing out of Shenley Industries and some of the wineries out of the valley, which was one of the targets of many of the ranches in the San Joaquin Valley in Delano, California. But no, we were we were a union.
And then, so how did you two, kind of the two different groups, get together?
Well, what happened is that the United Auto Workers Union was allowing $10,000 a month to alleviate the pain of the resources that are needed for the union, and that was a great help. But when the Agricultural Workers Union comes in and requests the NFWA, the National Farm Workers Association, to join the union, Chavez was reluctant. He said, we're not ready. You guys want to throw a wildcat strike with the team? Fine, with us, we'll support it. Well, how are you going to support it if your people that you consider to be members are going to cross our picket line. How are you going to do that? It's going to pit Filipinos against Mexicans.
And is that what was happening?
Well, to a degree, it was beginning to happen. But Marriott Young, very sharp organizer, who led the group, mostly with Philip Vera Cruz, were able to convince Chavez and put some pressure, on him through some of his people that supported Chavez. That we need to really seriously consider this. So there's a meeting, going back and forth, as we understand, and then finally they called for a community meeting. At that community meeting, there was more pressure on Chavez. So Chavez, even though right to the last minute at that meeting, he buckled in because he didn't want to get up to speak after many close people to Chavez were pushing him because they felt, you're the leader of this group, this non-profit group, basically it was not a union, and but most people didn't care whether it was a union or not a union. The fact is, he predominantly was like an activist in that region, so they figured, why would he not be part of this movement? But anyway, he joined, and they voted, supposedly, to join, the strike in 1965, September 15th, I think it was, 16th, they went on strike jointly to join this merger. But we didn't come in until, after supporting them through news media that we were getting, and we were supporting them that way, and then taking loads of food and clothing and whatever to Delano to help them and some money resources too.
And was there an interchange of the workers between the Filipino and the Mexican farm workers?
I don't understand what you mean.
I mean, were they just like, especially like after you joined or during that process, did the two groups of workers, did they remain separate, or did they start to,
Well,
just at the rank and file level, you know what I mean?
a lot of strange things happen in my book. I kind of describe, the parameters about the intricacies about the, internal politics. There's always internal politics in any organizational, venture, and also differences of opinion. And of course, there were those differences of opinion in regards to, I think, one of the biggest conversations that happened was you had many of the ministers who were wanting to do good, and of course the church, the Catholic Church, to some degree, had a vested interest because the mass population of the people we're dealing with are Catholics, and they figured, well, what better idea than to have the Virgin of Guadalupe lead, in many of these events, even though many people felt, well, it's kind of sacrilegious because you're getting religious, with regards to this movement. Of course, there was the others who were Mexicans from Mexico, who were more hardcore, who came from communist, socialist groups in Mexico and organizations and labor unions in Mexico that did not like the fact that Chavez was using this imagery of religious objects, and the fact is that this was a class struggle of workers and working people, and of course that led to some of the internal politics. As much as he was surrounded, he was surrounded basically with a lot of these people. Even I was a critic of him, of whether are we leading a labor class struggle here, or leading a pilgrimage for the churches and the benefit of the churches. Even though nonviolence was very important because we didn't want any bloodshed. The history in the San Joaquin Valley back in the 30s, especially 1933, there was plenty of bloodshed, and of course a lot of that history is in my family. When during the cotton strikes, my family members and my father and my uncles were involved in the strike. And they shot and killed the growers and murdered people. So we knew what violence was about. We knew what racism was about, and economic racism. This is what this is all about. But the fact is that with all these ingredients of what was happening, Chavez was under a lot of heat, and of course then there began to be kind of like I would say some distance in between each other. because the Filipino Union wasn't used to that kind of activity. Okay? What I just mentioned, they were more like, if we want to do something, and it's individual, and not the shit out of somebody, because they're hurting us and hurting us where it's really hurting us where it's violence, then we're gonna have to defend ourselves. And with Chavez, you didn't want to hear that because he thought it was not the right thing to do.
So are you saying like the rank and file in Chavez's whatever union was more into self-defense?
To a degree, yes. Yes. And that was evident when this started to happen, that they did everything they could to kind of like, how would I want to use the right correct word, convince people that that was not the right way to go. But people were so hard lying about it, saying, no, this is our movement, and our movement is that we're going to continue to make it a worker struggle. And of course, the more that kept coming up, the more they attempted, not to give it any limelight, or draw us into an open fight. So as it is, the media was there, every day, covering the whole day by day situation. So no, I think that was some of the differences in some of the groups, especially our group, going back to this whole situation is that then we heard that at one point before we merged with the group, we heard that the FLCIO was going to entertain donating through George Meany, president of the FLCIO, $10,000 a month. So that's going to bring it up to $20,000 a month for the strike. And of course, we weren't totally aware of the inner workings of the strike, okay, where it's at. Now we're into the almost a year and a half, a little bit into that much. So what happens is that we say, I call Oscar Gonzalez. Oscar Gonzalez was the president of the union based out of San Jose, California. And if you remember back in the days prior to that, San Jose was the heart of the canning industry, where you had all the canning industry, Del Monte and Campbell's and all these companies that were canning fruit and vegetables, taking a lot of these vegetables and fruits from the labor of farm workers in that respect. So you had a lot of workers in the canneries, even here in Sacramento. You have 7 or 8 major canneries here in Sacramento. Today they're closed down. You only have one remnant of a cannery over on Alhambra, which is the now state-bought cannery, and the buildings are still there, but they're now used for the computers to cool them, because the brick has a cooling factor with regards to those buildings, so that's where they have all their computers there. But getting back to this whole question of the merger, or we wanting to say to Chavez, all we want is a $1,500 a month to operate out of the valley, or the valley, that's in Oxnard, Ventura, San Luis Obispo, Santa Maria, and Salinas, in that region in Watsonville, to prepare the groundwork, okay? And we met with him. I called him up and I requested a meeting. He asked what it's for. I said, well, we want to talk about, working together closely, because we're a union. And of course, at that moment, we weren't really clear that he was not a union, or his group was not a union.
Were they doing organizing in the fields?
I think the organizing they were doing is they were using the service center, which is basically what they had, was a service center.
I see.
And the service center was acting as a go-with between problems in the domestic, in the community, in the rural areas, with immigration or arresting people getting drunk and jailed, or accidents, workers' compensation cases, and labor commissioner cases.
And meanwhile, you guys were organizing in the fields.
We were organizing the fields in the coastal regions,
Right,
the strawberry workers.
And how was that going in that time? I mean, what kind of reception were you getting? What were you?
Well, the news of what was happening in Delano was reaching the Spanish-speaking community, you know, through whatever medium they had, either through the radio or through the beginnings of the television, you know, just barely, okay? But mostly through the radio, and maybe newspaper, the La Opinion out of Los Angeles, which is very predominant, you know, in the Southern California, Ventura region. All the upper regions of the coastal valleys, you had those community newspapers that, you know, put in something about the Great Strike in Delano. But anyway, the bottom line is that Chavez denied us, and we were not too happy about that. We just said, well, we'll just go independent. You go with the FLCIO, and fuck you, okay? And basically, we continued. We began to do a lot of work in the community, you know, organizing. And the Teamsters got wind that we were organizing, and that we were in the fields. And
So you were working with the Teamsters.
well, not right away. It's when we started going into, you know, Salinas and touching base with some of the Bud Arnold workers. Bud Arnold was a farm worker in a contract that was run by the Teamsters. You could call a sweetheart contract if you want. But Bud Arnold was the largest lettuce grower in the western United States, or the United States, and encroaching into Mexico then. But it was that what made the Teamsters approach us. They had like a consumer boycott of their canning products, or some of the canneries didn't want to sign. So they approached us in Oxnard and said they saw a movement there. So they said, "Can we talk to you?" I said, "Yeah. What do you want to talk about?" We'll go to Teamsters, and you know we need help in L.A. with a boycott. Well, go to Chavez and see what he'll do. And, no, we went to him, and they're pissed off because you know of what was happening. Yeah, you guys have been wanting to bust their strike, blah blah. He said, "Well, what do you want?" He says, "We need some help. There's a lot of workers at the canneries are Mexican, you know, Chicano, whatever." So we said, "Well, what do you want? We want you to help us." Like how? He says, "Well, help us in L.A." Well, we haven't got any money to go to L.A. You know, what are you offering? You're gonna give us buses, gasoline for the buses, pay for the buses, and pay for breakfast, and pay for lunch, and pay for dinner? Are you willing enough to do that? Well, we'll consider it. Oh, really? He says, "Can you get us, you know, 1 or 2 buses? We'll get you 4 buses if you want, but make sure that you live up to the agreement." But I have to go back and talk to the people and see what they say. So we talked to, you know, the union, our union, the United Farm Workers Union. Then, of course, we used to have a community organization. We jumped from that, you know, like Chavez's Social Center. We jumped to that. But anyway, the bottom line is that Chavez was not happy. By that time, we put out a community newspaper, and it started to go almost the whole valley, the entire San Joaquin Valley, and for sure the coastal valley, where we had committees, you know, all over the place. So Chavez saw us, I believe, as a threat. He was not happy. Of course, we weren't happy either. You know, we said, "Hey, you wanted to keep all the money to yourself. You could at least given us some seed money, because sooner or later you're going to win there. Sooner or later, and you're going to end up coming to our region. Like all of a sudden you come in and fly in a parachute into our region when we've been here doing a lot of work. What is that? What's that going to be for our people? You come in and because you're Cesar Chavez and supposedly the Messiah. No, you're no Messiah to us. You're just a worker like anybody else. For that matter, you're not even a farm worker." So anyway, the bottom line is that things began to develop.
So at one point you did merge with Chavez. workers, right?
Yeah, he finally got his way. The Teamsters, pretty much fund us. They're funding our effort with the agreement that they would not encroach, or take us to encroach into the battle in Delano, and that our concentration would be in the coastal valleys. And the bottom line is that we also expected that if we called for a general strike in the strawberry fields, they would pull off the semi truck and trailers that were Teamsters, and not deliver or take any of those berries out from the cold storages to be shipped out throughout the United States. So we got those agreements, and plus a budget. They gave us a budget. They gave us a charter. We had our own charter, union charter.
And so
Local.
how did that work out as far as when you were all merged into one?
Well, the Teamsters wanted to have complete control. We said no.
Mm-hmm.
And then take your fucking charter and shove it up your ass. We're not gonna take that shit. So you leave us alone. Well, then they had now two problems. One to deal with us, how they control us, and then the other is that their dilapidated campaign going down the drain. That was being led by a guy named Bill Grammy. Bill Grammy was with the Teamsters, and he was pretty adamant that he wanted to win that, and he had close ties to Jimmy Hoffa. And of course, when we got into negotiations, we had Jimmy Hoffa in the negotiations too, with regards to this agreement. And of course, everything was hunky dory. But then it came a time where Chavez was putting a lot of pressure on the Teamsters, nationwide. So that didn't look good, within the AFL-CIO and the ranks of labor, so to speak. So they buckled in, the Teamsters. They called us into a meeting and they said, we all want to be happy, a happy family, and we want to, join together and let's fight this struggle together.
And so then, that's what was happening, like, at one level, but on the level of, like, in the field, amongst the rank and file, what was the mood and what were people thinking and going through and talking about?
Well, in Delano, we're talking about Delano, there was no real entry into the fields because you were considered trespassing. The only contact you had with workers were any evening meetings you had, house meetings in some of their homes. Once we began to see violence taking place, with shootings and killings and beatings, and being jailed, because that's what happened to us. Many of us, were beaten and jailed. I began to see the reaction from the workers, the rank and file saying, "Fuck you! This non-violence bullshit is not going to go anywhere."
So did that become? So were you saying that became a big issue of discussion in the meetings?
What meeting?
You said you'd have meetings after work, and
No, well, what I'm getting at is there's some work being done, making contact with the workers,
right.
so-called scabs. Okay? And those that were, friends of ours, were giving us information about what's happening inside,
Oh, I see.
that kind of thing. But then they were also being given somewhat information of what's going on in the union. But they generally would have a Friday night meeting at the Filipino Hall in Delano, which the hall was owned by the Filipino Association in Delano, and not so much by the Filipino Union
Right.
or the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. They paid, for the kitchen and the rental, that kind of thing. It wasn't free, but in most cases you could consider it free with what they were paying the Filipinos for their, the association for the use of it. But what I'm getting at is that the Filipino Hall, generally it was supposedly the strikers and the supporters coming into town, they would join to do the rah 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 rah, you know, blah blah blah, and a report of what's happening throughout the country regarding support and churches and groups and you know that kind of activity and some boycott activity. We had back then some boycott cities, but not that many. So, because I'm telling you the whole story, basically on tape here, but it got to where um, there's enough documentation there where reports are coming. I'll say it this way: reports are coming back that growers are complaining that barns were beginning to blow up, barns were being burned, the, their tractors are being destroyed, they're being destroyed by their gasoline tanks, and many of these things. Plus, they were cutting down all the little trees that had just planted. These were the allegations that were being made, not only by them, but all three district attorneys in the three tri-county counties in that region. And of course, that pissed Chavez up to no means. He was pissed off. And again, there was very few people that were in this one meeting that he called. And the one meeting was at the Filipino Hall, midday. Then we were on the strike field till 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then have a meeting at 7, and then go home and eat, whatever. He called this meeting, and he ordered, to lock all the doors. Nobody come in, nobody leave. And that was the meeting where he let all hell break loose. And he was so pissed because of the whole issue and question of violence. And I'm going to say everything here because I got it in the book, but it was the most profound meeting I was in during that time to have seen what was happening and couldn't believe what was happening. And I said to myself, you, Al Rojas, you made one fucking big mistake in your life. This is it. You should have stayed independent. You made one big fucking mistake.
So what did you do from there?
Well, I think what happened, when Chavez walks out, everybody kind of very emotional. And I said to my wife, we made a mistake. This is a bunch of shit. There's nothing. This is dead. So basically I got up and made a little speech and said, I don't know about you, but to me, this is a moment where you, or whoever's here, is going to sit down and look at this and how we're going to make the difference out of this. And all I'm going to tell you is, I'm fucking disappointed. So some people there, one in particular, caught what I was saying. So everybody went home, like all people are lost in their minds of where they're gonna go. There was about 49 people there. 49 people that represented the movement. Some people may argue with me, but we were there. Very few people of those 49 people are alive today. So that night, I'd say closer to almost 12 o'clock midnight, and there's a man there who's a minister, I won't name his name. He said, hi, what's up? He says, can I talk to you? It's kind of late though, but my wife said, who is it? And I told her, let him come in. So she was still in bed. I had gotten up in bed. I'm sitting inside of the bed, looking at him. He says, what's up? He says, Al, I want to tell you. I was struck by what you said. What do you mean? You said something that left me with, I gotta ask him, is this what you said? Is this what you meant? I said, no. I'll tell you what I said to my wife. We talked about it. We made a mistake coming to this movement. A movement that is a religious movement, not a working class movement. And the only thing I can see in what I said there is out of those 49 people that were there, which is my count. Your count may be a little bit bigger. I said, no matter what, there was only 49 people there. That's the movement. But it's not the movement. There's a lot of people with a lot of hopes out there. And it's too fucking bad that none of us can see it. I said, well, what would you do? There's only one thing to do. And I don't know where I'm willing to go out there and put my head on our heads out there, for sake of the way we were treated, because we were once Teamsters, and there's a lot of that, ostracizing people with this, divisions of this brotherly love bullshit that you're projecting to the rest of the world. When you treated us like scum of the earth, and my kids like scum of the earth, you ministers. It's organized. You got a man that's over there starving himself to death? Well, let him fucking starve himself to death. But this is the momentum where we go out and tell the workers out in the field, you guys want a union? And there's your Messiah who's starving himself. And what about the fuck are you gonna do? You're gonna do something? You're gonna do it? Let's do it. That's what I would do. I would use him, what he's doing, in saying, these people say that they want to fight for their union. Get off your goddamn, your starvation diet, creating here. Which I knew was, he himself was strategic in that. He knew what he was doing. If these guys can't pick it up, that they can go out and make this a newsworthy item of what's happening to this man, he becomes another Mahatma Gandhi.
Right.
And what did Mahatma Gandhi do? Mobilize people in that manner. Even Martin Luther King, to a degree, a great degree. So all I'm saying is that, agree or not agree or disagree, whatever, but you want to continue doing this, or you want to go back to Oxnard and do what you were supposed to be doing, is forming an independent union. But to this day, I really believe I should have done. There's no reason why there shouldn't have been 2 or 3 or 10 unions working in the fields. Look where the union is today. Look at what's happening today. And that's what burns me today, with regards to what we got to do.
What is happening today?
Labor's failure to fight back. Labor's failure to allow the rank and file to take the reins of their own union. And these people who have no business leading a union, that don't belong there, and didn't come from the rank and file, because if it comes from the rank and file, they got to fight for their union. Why should they fight for their union when somebody's treating them paternalistically? You're like my little children, but at the same time, I'm thieving your treasury and your sweat and labor and tears and death. That's my anger.
In the carpenters union, they did all come from the rank and file. They are all former carpenters, or almost all of them. But they're a million miles distant from the rank and file.
They're making good money.
Yeah.
Okay? What do they care? All they want to do now is they want to retire. They're thinking about their 2 or 3 pensions that they've been able to accumulate. Okay? And that's what they're looking at. They got caught into the greed of power and authority, and treating with authority workers and becoming anti-democratic. They become the same bosses in corporate minds and wanting to exemplify the corporations, for that matter. That's the problem. The problem is that they've been able to stifle some of that militancy, but I don't believe so. I think that militancy is there, and you saw it and you yourself have said it, in some of these teacher strikes that didn't come from the upper levels. In fact, they were opposed to it. They were opposed to the workers coming and taking control, which is the best thing that's happened to their unions. And hopefully those unions and the leadership takes over and gets rid of these guys and say, no, this is the same thing with the UFW. Same thing. When we won the boycott, okay, the boycott was, aside from this stupid movie that was made to make Chavez another messiah, again, reinforcing that, but it was about his family. It wasn't about my family or anybody's family, especially Chavez's family. It was about the workers. In that movie, one focus they should have focused on. What made the boycott win? The boycott was the key fundamental power that brought back that union from death. The union had died. Back to what I just mentioned a few minutes ago. It was dead until we found out throughout the United States with 35 families instead, the people, American people, the power of the people is within the people and consumers. That's where the power is at. And that's where it's at to this day in the fields and wherever any worker goes to work, that's where the power is at. It's not the power of one guy who says, I'm the president of the union and I say what's got to go down without any input from any of the workers as it relates to what needs to happen, so that I can share it with everybody that this is not a movement about me, it's a movement about all of us together. That's what the movement's about. And the movement is that we instill this into all kinds of other people too. But when Chavez came to Chicago, there was about 300 of us there. We won the boycott. It was a great historic achievement. It never happened ever. Back to, when we got in that station wagon in Delano with, bags of our clothes in shopping bags and Safeway bags. And my wife says, how do you do a boycott? We're already in the car with the kids and everybody in the car, clothes and everything, pots and pans and whatever we could carry. I said, I don't know. Well, go ask him. He's right there. He's coming to give us a check and say goodbye. I got off the car and said, oh, be careful. Here's a check to help you a little bit along the way when you get over there. Along the way, here's the list of all our supporters, the El Malcriado, the newspaper from the union, and the contact where you're going to stay. We've already called them. You're on your way. So you have a place to stay. And Chavez, I have a question. She said, my wife's asking me, how do you do a boycott? So, I don't know. You don't know? You don't know? No. Al, this has never happened before, ever, in the history of that labor movement, what we're doing. Oh my God. So you're telling me we're going out there to do the impossible. No, it's not the impossible. We can make it happen. But it's going to be up to you to do whatever it takes to win this boycott. All of you. And simply just tell people not to eat California grapes. That's all. That's all. That's all. That's all. I said, thanks a lot. Got the check, got in the car, slammed the door, and sped out of town. And says, wait a minute. My wife says, what did he tell you? He didn't know, goddammit. I'll tell you later. So, all I can say is that in that meeting in Chicago, you could feel the power of it. We had key people from all these cities, in the Midwest and at least all the way to Pennsylvania, okay, and West Virginia. And he said, yeah, you guys are happy. You got reason to. You guys did one hell of a job historically. Here you are, we signed the contracts, I'm here telling you that it's a done deal. 150 union contracts were signed, close to over 100,000 workers. 100,000 workers. 100,000 workers with three dollars a month dues. That's a hell of a lot of money a month. Okay, almost $500,000 a month. Anyway, he says, I know that the question is going to come up, but I'm going to beat you guys to it. He says, some of you guys have been on $5 and $10 a week for 10 years. The rest were volunteers. You know, get the keep people from delaying it. It's going to be salaries. But not one of you who get a salary will earn more than a farm worker working under union contract in the fields. Not one of you, so long as I am alive, will pay a decent wage. But mind you, if you want to stay, stay, but don't think in big money and six-figure, salaries. Let alone two figures, that goes beyond, an enormity of money. Workers are only going to be earning about $32,000 at most a year, and not the $16,000 that they're earning now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that understood? Yeah, it's understood. Okay. Well, today, the United Farm Workers president, that now retired after I don't know how many years of collecting a benefit that was earned by many of us at $5 and $10 a week. That's great. He's a great guy. He's a nice guy. He meant well. He's a family member of the Chavez family. They appointed him. They anointed him. He never worked in the fields, and not one day. The only time he worked in the fields was when he went to his refrigerator to get some grapes out of the refrigerator. Ever worked. And today, that day that I criticized him, when he was here officiating with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor, and Felipe Calderon, president of Mexico, who had been shooting union teachers in Oaxaca, and had 4 boxes of candy coming out of the banquet here in Sacramento. I caught him and I chastised him. I said, after all this money that you earn, $125,000, $30,000 a year, when farm workers are earning a pittance, I hope that those goddamn candies give you the diarrhea, goddammit, by the time you eat those goddamn 4 boxes, you son of a bitch. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that unions today have lost their way. More so because if ever a time to see them out in the streets, see them out in the fields, see them out in the factory fields, see them out supporting those 100,000 workers in the maquilas in the border, and joining forces with the independent union labor movement in Mexico, just because we're in a new world, a new era, globalization. And we can't see it in what's happening with globalization, where now we have U.S. corporations pitting workers against Mexicans here and also here. And the Democrats don't understand and can't see. You want to know why this blonde, red-headed, asshole racist is in power? Because of you. Because of you. Because you could not see back in 1994, nor even today with the UMSCA. And you ask people about UMSCA, they tell you, what's that? That's this guy's deal about more pain for the working class in the world in regards to the North American continent. Mm-hmm. Canadian, U.S., and Mexican workers right now. Forget Central America and CAFTA and whatever. But the bottom line is that this whole issue about the unions not fighting back, and unwilling to fight back, when you have AFL-CIO, what's his name, Trumka, okay. Where he says, we'll wait and see what we get out of this agreement. Well, you got a piece of shit. It's even worse. But the one thing he did you guys in the higher levels of the national leadership of the unions has stripped you of the voice of the working class. And he takes it and says, I went to Michigan, I went to Pennsylvania, I went to what's it called, the Rust Belt now, and said, I represent you, fuck the unions, I'm going to represent you, I'm going to get you your jobs back by going after those jobs from those Mexicans that took our jobs. It wasn't those Mexicans. It's the same partners, his partners, and the corporations that did what they did.
Right.
But who helped them? Was the Democratic Party. Obama didn't do jack shit for us. After all these promises in labor, it's looking good. Oh, worst of all, maybe you guys glorify him out in the so-called barely hinging to the middle class. That he's a great, because he's an African American, he's a great, president. I say not. When he took 3 million people that were forced indigenous people that come to this country, they did not want to come to this fucking country, racist country. They'd rather stay home to earn a decent wage from your fucking goddamn, corporations that came in to pillage, rape, and thieve, and take and steal all the natural resources from the Mexican people. Oil, gold, pharmaceutical, plant life. All these things that meant life to many of the indigenous populations. Now you even ship millions and millions and millions of tons of GMO, U.S. subsidized tax money corn, GMO corn, now dumping it and poisoning the people and processing that millions and millions of tons of tortillas, the number one staple food in Mexico, where that poison chemical that derives out of its own kernel. That's how the ingenuity of University of California, Davis was able to, change it for Monsanto and use a public institution to do it. You think we're not pissed because of that? And what he's doing to our people? People are dying of cancer. Members of our family and many families are dying of cancer. Do you think that the corporations give a shit about that? You think there's not any anger with? Does anybody want to ask why is there the United States of America, the most powerful nation in the world, that has committed 150 wars in third world countries they call, but people of color world, and you wonder why are all these immigrants you call immigrants? They're indigenous people, Indians, at least here in the North American continent, in Central America now. And Central America has a big history about what we've done to that country. And you want to ask, why do they hate us in the world? Well, you got reason to why they hate you. But you know what? The indigenous people are so good that they wave to people and they because they're bringing some money to they can survive. And what's happening in this country? We have a real serious problem. Of what Mexico's saying now with the new president, the right to migrate, that's not going to be my thing, which is our campaign that we've had for many, many years in regards to, we want people to stay in Mexico. We want people to have decent jobs. But we are not going to stand for Driscoll's and all these U.S. corporations to come from this country that they're exploiting workers here and go exploit workers over there on the basis of big billion-dollar profits at the sake of people's lives when they're being poisoned in the fields. People are dying here. They're dying here. Forget Mexico, but let's not forget them, because it's about consumers and about people being able to live, and survive on the world. But the only tool we have, when we beg the unions to give us money and go to the community groups to help us and support us. Yes, it's emotional.
Right.
I'm 80 years old. And I want to do everything I can to the last day of my life I can breathe.
Cool.
Anyway.
That's